Thank you all for being here, and thank you, panelists, for those very thoughtful keynotes that have reflected your background and how you see things. And what we will do in about an hour, we have slightly less than an hour, is maybe drill down on some of these points and see where we go. I was struck by the fact that all five, actually seven, of your talks recognize that the international order is changing, perhaps changing radically. Words like collapsing were not used, but there are degrees of change, and we seem to be on the spectrum where this is major change. Thoughts about how power deals with rules and the importance of rules, and yet the recognition of power. And then third, I suppose, how various countries who are not great powers can help design a system that balances those imperatives of security, responsibility, power, peace, prosperity. What I thought I'd do is begin with the European wing of this panel, Mr. Gentiloni, Mr. Wolf, and ask you this question, and this is part of the guiding questions we have for this panel. The European Union has, and Europe indeed, historically has played a major role in the way the world has evolved and in the rules that we currently face, which are undergoing change. It appears to be playing much less of a role now, and there's much talk of a G2 and the fact that power dominates governance. The EU is based on rules and balancing sovereignty with integration. I'd like to ask each of you, and maybe begin with Mr. Wolf and then go to Mr. Gentiloni. How do you see Europe playing a role in whatever emerges, and what kinds of lines do we draw on this situation not getting worse?
Ich denke, dass diejenigen nicht zum Spielball anderer werden, die selber an ihrer Stärke arbeiten, keine Frage. Das heißt, die wirtschaftliche Stärke, die Wehrfähigkeit, die Verteidigungsfähigkeit, das Glauben an die eigenen Werte, das sind wichtige Voraussetzungen. Europa darf man nicht unterschätzen. Wir sind über 500 Millionen Verbraucher. Wir haben eine geringere Verschuldung als viele andere, eine geringere Spreizung der Einkommen. Bei uns gibt es Zugang zu Bildung und Gesundheit für alle, unabhängig von der sozialen Situation. Wir sind vorankommen beim Klimaschutz und sind sehr innovativ. Also Europa wird ein wichtiger Partner in der Welt bleiben. Wir haben etwas, worauf mich mal der Botschafter von Laos aufmerksam gemacht hat. Der Botschafter von Laos hat gesagt, Laos und China haben etwa das Verhältnis wie Malta und Deutschland, die Größe der Bevölkerungszahl. Aber China geht mit Laos nicht so um wie Deutschland mit Malta oder Zypern oder anderen kleinen Ländern. Bei uns hat jedes Land einen Kommissar in der Europäischen Kommission und jedes Land wird auf Augenhöhe behandelt, unabhängig von seiner Größe. Und das ist etwas, was Europa mitbringt. Respekt, Wertschätzung füreinander. Und das kann auch auf die Welt übertragen werden. Ich glaube, dass Japan und Deutschland Länder sind, die in anderen Ländern relativ hohes Ansehen haben, weil sie verlässlich sind, weil sie Handschlagqualität haben. In der Entwicklungszusammenarbeit zum Beispiel. Ich war jetzt in Indonesien, in Ghana, in Kenia, in Bolivien und überall habe ich die japanischen Botschafter getroffen und die haben mit den deutschen Botschaftern sehr viel gemacht bei humanitären Maßnahmen, bei Technologien, bei Wasserstoff. Also wir sind ein Partner und das müssen wir bleiben, der wertgeschätzt wird und wir schätzen unsere Partner wert. Ich glaube, das muss Anstand, Stil muss die Strategie sein, um in der Welt zurechtzukommen. Und wo sind die roten Linien? Die roten Linien sind, wenn jemand Grenzen verschieben will, wenn jemand die Menschenwürde nicht achtet, wenn jemand die Meinungsfreiheit, die Pressefreiheit nicht akzeptiert, dann müssen wir sagen, das ist dann nicht mehr der Partner auf Grundlage gleicher Werte, sondern das ist dann ein Konkurrent, ein Mitbewerber. Und ich glaube, diese roten Linien muss man auch immer wieder diskutieren, dass man sie nicht verschiebt, dass wir nicht so miteinander umgehen, anders werden, als wir geworden waren, als wir bisher sind. Das wäre meine Antwort auf Ihre beiden Fragen.
Lonely, same question to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I fully agree with President Wolf on the fact that we Europeans tend frequently to underestimate ourselves. This is part of our culture. I remember a very high-level Chinese official asking me, but why you Europeans are asking former leaders of your countries to make reports to explain why Europe is in trouble, why you have delays. He was referring to reports that, by the way, were made predominantly by former Italian prime ministers recently, Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta. So yes, we are frequently underestimating the advantages that we have in our societies. President Wolf mentioned some of them. And I fully agree. I would add life expectancy, that for my age is very important. You can live longer if you live in Europe. But apart from this, for sure we have also new challenges in this changing world order, evolving world order. Why? Because we, to make it simple, after a fantastic 20th century where Europe grew in number of its members, democracy evolved after the collapse of the Soviet Union all over Europe, prosperity evolved in Europe. In this new century, we could say that we Europeans had too optimistic ideas that proved to be illusions. First, the fact that we could have cheap gas from Russia. Second, that we could have an enormous Chinese market open to our manufacture without any problems. And third, that our American allies will continue to provide themselves the burden of European security. In these last 20 years, these three strong ideas proved to be three illusions. They are very different, of course, but no more gas from Russia. Only 13% of European gas is now coming from Russia, and it is mostly in a couple of countries. Our trade deficit with China in 2025 increased from 300 billion euros to 350 billion euros only in 1 year. So this fantastic opportunity of the Chinese market is becoming a fantastic opportunity for Chinese export in Europe. And third, the messages from the US administration that were there at least since 2014. I was in a NATO summit as Italian foreign minister when President Obama called for increasing of the expenditure, defense expenditure, to 2%. this didn't happen. But of course, President Trump, especially the second term of President Trump, is much more open in the message. So we have to catch up from this illusion. And the key word, in my view, is what in Europe we call strategic autonomy, how to build our autonomy in terms of trade, of technological innovation and competitiveness, and of defense. Easy in words, not very easy, because Europe is not a state. Europe is a union of different member states, and yes, it is predictable, safe, but very slow. And the world is changing very fast. So these advantages of Europe, predictability, to be a safe partner, risk to become also a liability if you are too slow. I have to say that in a certain sense, paradoxically, we should thank President Trump, because President Trump has been a wake-up call for Europe. So the European tendency towards a stronger autonomy, we can't be the only herbivores in a world of carnivores. You may have heard this line. This was strongly supported by the fact that President Trump is having the policy America First and everything that General Kellogg explained us before. Thank you.
As a Canadian, I can sort of empathize with your assessment. Herbivore, safe, reliable, but now seeking a new way forward. So thank you for that. General Kellogg, thank you especially for that very concise and important summation you gave of where Russia-Ukraine stands, for those of us who don't follow it in great detail. I thought that was very helpful. But given your vantage point, I did want to ask you about your views on where U.S.-China relations might be headed.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Let me step back a second. It's when it was commented about President Trump, you know, President Trump is eminently readable. Most people don't believe that, but it really is. And what he has said in the past, he's actually had happen today. And I've been with him since 2015, and everything he said has wanted to have happen, he's had the United States happen. When it comes to China, he's gone through a period of where he thought about was a hard split. Then we went through, well, we want to have a soft landing, or do we want to buy time and build insulation? You know, remember, when Trump won, and Trump 2 is not Trump 1. It's a different way of looking at the world. But in Trump 1, we had COVID. And he believed that the country that brought COVID to the world was, in fact, China. And he believes that China never really opened up, that they were responsible for it. So at that time, we were talking about a hard split, strategic deconfliction. Where it starts now, in looking at China, and really, when you think about it, it's relatively recent. It's more recent than Iran, meaning time. It's only since 1979 that we really started to work with China, when Richard Nixon went to China, and when he started seeing how it was all going to work. And in the first Trump administration, we kept the four what we considered adversaries apart. Adversaries, by the way, if you look at the actual definition, does not mean an enemy, but it means like an opponent. You kept the Chinese over in this corner, the North Koreans in this corner, you kept the Iranians in this corner, and you kept the Russians in this corner. So you got that separation between them all. But when Trump was out of the administration, during those 4 years he was there, they actually joined together. So the question we've got right now is, how do you kind of break it apart
In the opening part of your talk, you described President Trump's approach to the rest of the world as tough, transactional, and America first. And if I had to describe Xi's approach, it would be tough and China first. But I don't know if transactional is the way I think he would take more of that long view. And I guess I'm asking, is there room for a deal between the two of them, given their different time perspectives? Or do I have my assessment wrong?
No, I think it's a great question. I think there is a deal to be had. Well, the first one that besides the economic piece is the kinetic piece. We think if there's going to be any new nuclear deal, that happens within the world, it'll be that Russia, United States, but China has to be included as well, because it's a growing nuclear power that we see in there. And he believes he's got a good relationship with President Xi that he has with Putin, but he believes in dialogue first. There's no harm in talking with, your protagonist or leaders of a foreign nation that may not agree with you. And I think he's done a good job in doing that. But it's reached a point where I had to pick, if you prioritize, when he is prioritized, it's the Western Hemisphere, and we saw that in Venezuela. Then he wants to calm down the Middle East because he believes that's a powder keg. Then he looks at the Pacific as well. He's kind of looked at Europe and said to the Europeans, this war between Russia and Ukraine is in your backyard. It's not in our backyard. And the Europeans have supported it well. And my position with the Europeans on that, by the way, is you're better than you think you are. When I used to say that when we'd go into Ukraine, that you can really handle this fairly well if you wanted to Russia, and we can focus somewhere else with limited resources. You take your limited resources and you focus them on a certain area. But I think his preference, he meaning Trump, his preference is always to default to economics first, not military, not necessarily diplomatic. The theme with diplomatic issue, we talked about it, I had an interview earlier, is part of the problem that we've run into is people talk about the rule of law. I just like to know where everybody's been the last 40 years when you talk about the rule of law. When you think about it, I go back to 1938, and when you look forward, because you talk about the rule of law. Where was everybody when Russia took Crimea? Where was everybody when Russia invaded the rest of Ukraine out there? Or when you look at the Middle East, when the Iranians, we believe, were developing nuclear weapons. So the rule of law actually allows you to hide behind it and stand behind it and say, well, we're concerned about the rule of law. No, you're not. You're really not. It sounds really good. It makes you feel good. You can go home at night and feel good about it. But if you really mean about the rule of law, when you look at the United Nations, you look at others, you haven't really enforced that. And by the way, I go back, when you look at the history of the world, this is a changed relationship in the world, but it's not really a new change, because change has occurred. You can go back to the Peloponnesian League with Sparta and Athens when you look about it and how it's been developed to today. But you have to look at it and get a feeling for it. We're today where we're at, and President Trump has always been the first belief has always been economics. I'll tell you a little story about President Trump. I think, and during Trump 1, I think it always surprised foreign leaders when we had a foreign leader come into the Oval Office or to the cabinet room. The first question he had was, what's our balance of payment? What's our balance with you, our trade balance? He'd always start with an economic question, and most people wouldn't pick up on that. They'd say, oh, I thought you were going to ask about, our relations with so-and-so, or our military relations, but it was always an economic issue. And I think it was refreshing to me, being a former military officer, that he wasn't thinking kinetically at the start.
I haven't shared my questions with the panelists, but you've anticipated my last question to all of you, which was going to be about where you thought the rule of law was and where it's going. So now I've sort of revealed my cards on that one. President Yudo Yono, in your talk you mentioned stability, cooperation, and balancing sovereignty with identity as one of those Asian traits, sensible dispute resolution, and the risk of technologies excluding many parts of the world. You've been central with Prime Minister Kishida yesterday in initiating a dialogue among Asian leaders on rebuilding the world order, so thank you for that. But on the question of Asia's role in whatever comes next, could you expand a bit on that?
Yes, thank you. I think Asia, countries in Asia, have have the opportunity to play more roles in the future. It's not only how could we maintain our stability and security in this region, not only how could we continue growing our economy, but also we could do many things to accomplish global agenda, such as in saving our planet and reducing our poverty across the globe, across the regions. But the reality is that international relations are getting more dynamics, also in Asia. Asia, on the one hand, is a source of developments, engine of economic growth. But on the other hand, there are many also points in Asia that could be one of the flashpoints when it comes to peace and security. So imagining that we have to strengthen our regional cooperation and also strengthening our regional architecture to achieve all those objectives, economy, security, and other matters. So we need to strengthen, to expand more in our cooperation and partnership. We are having many regional architecture that is working well. For example, ASEAN, and also East Asia Summit that involving not only ASEAN countries, but also the United States, China, Russia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. If we could empower all those regional architecture, I think there will be many options. There will be many solutions to existing problems that we are facing together. If I could say on the how should Asia do, what can Asia do when it comes to rivalry between the US and China. So my perspective is that, and also I think this, the perceptions of many countries in the region. For example, Indonesia, we do not take side on the rivalry between the US and China. We are maintaining good relations with both countries, economy, political dialogue, and other agenda. But we are hoping that both China and the US could be part of the solution to maintain peace, stability, and order in the regions, to enhance our regional economy, and other things. I don't think that any country can stop the rivalry between the two countries, between the two great powers, China and the US. But we could appeal to both sides. Well, there is a rivalry, but there must be another agenda that those two countries can cooperate and give example to this region for a better Asia, economically, politically, and in the terms of security. So I think that's about the position and hope from all countries in the region. When it comes to the situation in South China Sea, for example, we know that the situation is still tense because the two countries and many other players are involved in the area, demonstrating its military might, military power. Even though ASEAN do not take side, but I think we have to continue appealing to both sides to refrain from any move that can destabilize the region. And we are also appealing in solving the problem must be back to negotiating table, dialogue, diplomacy, and also respecting international law. So this is our hope, actually, the Asian countries, because we really think that Asia is a large continent. We could accommodate every country to play their positive roles. That's my view on that.
Prime Minister Kishida, you have been a great supporter of multilateralism. It was clear in your talk today. You've been a great supporter of this conference, for which thank you also. Japan has historically also been a link between the G7 and the very dynamic part of Asia. One of the early supporters, as I recall, of the creation of the G20, which would have made global governance more inclusive. What role do you see Japan playing as we reconstruct a world order that, I think, as the Prime Minister said, on which the sun was setting?
はい、まず、アジアについて、今後どういった、ルールや秩序が作られていくのかということについて、例えば中国は今アジアにおいて影響力を強めようとしています。一方、アメリカはそういった中国の取り組みを認めていない、快く思っていない、こういった状況にあります。結論から言うと、やはりアジアは、アジアの国々が自分たちがどんなルールで国際地域の秩序を作っていくのか、これを考えていかなければならない、こういったことだと思います。だからこそ、昨日ご指摘いただきましたアジア円卓会議を開きました。アジアの国々が自らどういったルールを好ましく思うのか、あるいはこういった点まではアジアとして認められる、こういった秩序について考える、この自ら考える場が今まであまり少なかったのではないか、こういったことでこのアジア円卓会議、アジアの関係者でこのアジアの多国間主義、未来について考えていこう。これが昨日のアジア円卓会議でありました。対話をすることが目的であるということで、この第1回目の会合として大きな成果があったと思っています。そして今後アジアの多国間主義をどう考えるのか。今までアジアの多国間主義っていうのは経済中心の多国間主義でありました。しかしこれ未来を考えたならば、脱炭素ですとか、あるいはさまざまな経済や技術のルール作りですとか、あるいは今後は政治や安全保障についてもさまざまな多国間主義をアジアが考えていく可能性はあるんだということを昨日私は申し上げました。ぜひアジアの今後については、まずはアジアが自身がしっかり物事を考えていく。日本もアジアの一員でありますから、その中で一つ大きな役割、責任を果たしていきたいと思っています。具体的にどっちへ進んでいくのかは多国間主義ですから、まさにアジアの多くの国々との対話の積み重ねの結果だと思っています。その対話の第一歩が昨日切られた。ぜひこうしたアジアの対話、日本もしっかり対話の場を作ることによって、アジアの国々と共に未来の方向を考えていく、その役割を果たしていきたいと思っています。
I can't resist but ask you, what is your expectation of the meeting between President Trump and Premier Xi next month as regards Japan's place in Asia and the world?
はい、まず、米国と中国の対話、これ対話は大変重要なことだと思います。中身についてどうか、これはなかなか今から予想することはできない、予断は許されない、こんな状況だと思います。しかし、こうした米国と中国が対話をしていくことは大事だと思いますが、一方で先ほど申し上げたように、この米国、中国、こういった大国の立場も今どんどん変化しています。その中にあってやはり中小のこの弱い立場の国の立場もしっかりと国際社会の中で訴えていかなければならない。法の支配や 自由貿易やあるいは多国間主義っていうのはまさに弱い立場の国のためにある原則や理想だと思っています。こういった考え方を持つ国もたくさんいるんだということもやはりしっかりと発信していくことが大事なのではないかと思います。ですから米国と中国の対話どういった方向に行くのか今予断はできませんが、世の中には米国中国だけではなくして違う立場の国もたくさんあるんだということをぜひ両リーダーには頭に置いていただきながら対話を進めていただきたいと私たちは期待をしています。
Yeah, we often forget that leaders of great powers are also, their decisions have impacts beyond their realm, and how they treat that is often a sign of their leadership style, and that's a very good observation. Thank you. Before I move to the final question, President Wolf, there was one thing that caught me in your talk, which one doesn't hear much these days, and you spent a lot of time on the importance of empathy. Empathy is a very human value. We're talking about how governments and leaders can shape the great currents of our time and reshape multilateralism. Is there anything governments can do about empathy?
Ich glaube häufig, dass wir uns zu wenig fragen, was das mit unseren Kindern macht, was jeden Abend in den Fernsehnachrichten ausgestrahlt wird. Wir selber haben da eine gewisse dicke Haut uns zugelegt, aber Kinder, die in diese Welt wachsen und mit 7 Jahren, mit 9 Jahren, mit 12 Jahren sehen, was in der Welt los ist, die fragen sich doch, in welcher Welt sie groß werden. Und fragen wir uns nach unserer Verantwortung, diese Dinge wieder anders zu gestalten. Und der Schriftsteller Kurt Tucholsky hat gesagt, Erfahrungen vererben sich nicht. Die muss jeder selber machen. Wir erleben das ja auch bei unseren Kindern, die wollen nicht unsere Erfahrungen übernehmen, die wollen sie selber machen, die wollen gucken, wo die Probleme sind und sie wollen selbst die Erfahrung machen. Aber mit Krieg und Frieden sollten wir nie wieder Erfahrung machen müssen, sondern wir sollten den Frieden in Europa und den Frieden in weiten Teilen der Welt erhalten und friedlich zusammenarbeiten, und da ist das aller Anstrengung wert. Nach den 2 Weltkriegen im 20. Jahrhundert haben alle Staaten die Vereinten Nationen gegründet. Und alle haben gesagt, nie wieder Krieg, nie wieder Kampf gegen Minderheiten, nie wieder Verfolgung von Minderheiten, nie wieder eine Hinterzimmerdiplomatie. Präsident Wilson, der Präsident der Vereinigten Staaten nach dem Ersten Weltkrieg, wollte den Völkerbund, der scheiterte, dann kamen die Nationalsozialisten, der Zweite Weltkrieg. Aber dann war man zur Vernunft gekommen. Und jetzt gewinnt das Vergessen über das Erinnern. Und wenn wir es nicht schaffen, stärker zu erinnern, warum wir die Vereinten Nationen gegründet haben, die sind nicht perfekt, die haben Probleme. Sie bilden zum Beispiel nicht diese Welt ab. Es haben Vetomächte dort, Vetorechte nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg, aber Indien, Indonesien, 300 Millionen Menschen, 1,4 Milliarden Menschen sind im Sicherheitsrat nicht ständig vertreten und schon gar nicht mit dem Vetorecht. Das heißt, die heutigen Vereinten Nationen bilden die heutige Welt nicht ab. Und es gab eine Initiative von Japan, von Indien, von Deutschland, daran etwas zu verändern. Das ist leider gescheitert. Aber die Bevölkerung der Welt, wir Menschen, müssen fordern, ihr Politiker macht aus diesen Vereinten Nationen eine Organisation, die leistungsfähig ist. Nigeria hat bald so viele Einwohner wie Europa. Afrika überhaupt als Kontinent hat sehr viele junge Leute, sehr viel Innovation, sehr viel Wachstum, sehr viel Esprit, sehr viel Initiative, ist in den Vereinten Nationen nicht abgebildet. Das heißt, wir müssen gemeinsam, wenn wir hier verschiedene Kontinente vertreten, daran arbeiten, dass wir mehr zuhören, mehr aufeinander eingehen, und das ist Empathie. Nicht nur mit den eigenen 2 Augen gucken, auch mit dem des Gegenüber und mit einem 5. und 6. Auge von oben drauf. Deswegen bin ich so Indonesien orientiert, weil ich sage, da ist ein Riesenland, eine Demokratie mit verschiedenen Religionen, in der Verfassung Einheit in Vielfalt. Dort leben Christen, Muslime gut zusammen. Und in Jakarta gibt es zwischen der muslimischen Moschee und der katholischen Kathedrale einen Tunnel, den Tunnel der Versöhnung. Und da kamen mir junge Leute entgegen und die hatten einen Sticker Future Heroes. Und das waren junge Muslime, junge Christen, die Interesse füreinander hatten und ein Wochenende lang sich für die andere Religion interessiert haben. Das sind für mich Helden und Leute, die nur ihre eigenen Interessen sehen. Ich zuerst, ich. Das sind für mich keine Helden, sondern das sind ängstliche Menschen, die irgendwie Furcht haben, zu den Verlierern zu gehören. Die meisten Probleme machen alte Männer, die Angst haben, irgendwie nicht mehr richtig genommen zu werden. Und wir müssten mehr Frauen, mehr junge Leute in die Verantwortung ziehen und alles mit mehr Empathie und wir hätten weniger Probleme. Zum Beispiel bin ich Vogue, das ist nämlich achtsam. Achtsam gegenüber jedermann, das ist Vogue. Eigentlich müssten alle Menschen Vogue sein, dann hätten wir kaum Probleme. Aber solche Begriffe werden heute in Kulturkämpfen verfolgt. Und wer in Amerika in einem Antrag hat Vogue, der kriegt keinen Euro, keinen Dollar Förderung. Oder Gay oder Female oder Feminismus wird alles nicht mehr gefördert in Amerika. Ja, das ist doch im Grunde genommen etwas, das ist doch Kulturkampf im 17. Jahrhundert. Und da liebe ich dann eben lieber Kanada oder Mexiko, wo auch in Toronto 70% Einwanderer gut zusammenleben. Also darüber zu diskutieren und zu streiten, das hielt ich für wertvoll.
Thank you. So in this last round, and I'll start with you, Prime Minister, and then move this way. The question is about what kind of world do we think we will have in 5 or 10 years, but rather than keep it at that very general level, I thought the entry point might be exactly our view on rules of the game, and ask you to reflect on where the rule of law is today, and where do you think it's likely to go, which is also a way of getting at multilateralism, phase 2.
Well, a small question. Well,
3 minutes or less.
Well, first of all, rule of law, in my view, it's obvious. I think we should never forget that there are 2 dimensions here. One is the internal dimension. We are democracies, aren't we? And this is still, in my view, a value also in the global arena. Controversial, contested, always the risk that we, the Western countries, are teaching others, or we, the G7, are teaching others. But I don't think that we should lose the fact that we are part of what was called the free world some decades ago. Is this something that has lost completely any relevance at global level, or is it still important? My answer is very clear. I think it is also the European answer. This is still very important. So the rule of law is not only the international rules, but the respect for the rule of law as part of a democratic system that we should not impose with force, of course, but which should be still our flag. Globally, I think the General Kellogg has a point when he says that the disregard for the rule of law is not something recent. No, it always been a certain degree of hypocrisy in the respect of these principles. But I think something new is happening, and it is very, in my view, dangerous, which is that the fact that we don't respect the rule of law is not a last resort. It is the premise. So I remember very well, for example, the second war of the Gulf, when the US made an enormous effort to try to convince, explain that the Bush Junior war in Iraq was justified on the basis of international rules. You may remember Secretary of State Colin Powell trying to convince European countries, United Nations, etc. It was not a great success, and at the end we can say that the rules were forgotten at the time, but the effort was enormous. If we compare that effort to the situation now, nothing similar is happening. Yes, reaction, again, I'm quoting General Kellogg, reaction when it happened, the annexation of Crimea, 2014, was very limited. I remember very well that the conversation between, in one side, the foreign ministers of US, Italy, Germany, France, and on the other side, the foreign minister of Poland, Baltic states, etc. The discussion was, we were very moderate at the time. We should continue the dialogue to engage Russia, etc. And Poland and the Baltic states were saying, you are crazy. If you don't react now, Putin will... So yes, history will say perhaps it was a mistake, but again, the violation of the full-scale invasion was something unprecedented. So yes, in a certain sense, the rule of law at global level had several exceptions. The trend I see now is to ignore it. And there is a difference from existing rules that can have exceptions and the fact that single countries decide on their own what is in their interest. I'll give you a last example. We will have a new nuclear arms race. Why? Because non-proliferation treaties will be considered as not so significant. And many countries will think and try to build their nuclear capacity. I don't think that we can accept a world of this kind. And so the effort of multilateralism, cooperation, we all know the weaknesses of UN, WTO, you name it. But if we don't work to strengthen them, we are working against peace and prosperity.
Okay. I know it's a big question, but profound answers, shorter, please. General Kellogg, where does your, no, it's okay, it's good, very, very passionate. Where does your critique of the way we've handled rule of law take us?
Short answer, cowardice. People, there's been UN resolutions. Why do countries vote against UN resolutions that condemn the war in Ukraine? There are nations that did that. They talk about the rule of law. People hide behind the rule of law when you have to aggressively stop what happened. If we talked about, and I'll use 1938 as a good example, when Neville Chamberlain went to Munich and he said, peace in our time. What came out of that? The Holocaust, World War II. You have to draw a line. And sometimes that line is hard. But I prefer my sons and their sons and daughters don't go to war next time. And I use that, it sounds harsh, but too many times nations have hidden behind it the term rule of law. And I've used this, by the way, when I was talking with a nation, when I said, why is it always that old men send young men off to war? You know, it's because they talk about it, but they don't have to do anything about it.
President Yudo, your view on where rule of law is headed?
Yes. Rule of law is a child of justice. Rule of law is the important element of democracy. We fight for democracy by using one of them, rule of law, to say no to authoritarianisms. Globally, I do believe that rule of law is very useful to limit the power of any country, any leader that violates what we are wanting in the international relations. Remember why I'm saying the power must be checked by other powers, because power tends to corrupt, everybody knows. Absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. In these connections, let's go back to the principle of the rule of law, respecting international law. In war, I am a general myself, respecting the law of war and also humanitarian conventions. With that, I think the world will be more safer, more just, and good for everybody.
Thank you. President Wolf. Same thoughts on where you think rule of law should be.
Ja, die Frage war von Ihnen ja auch, wie die Welt in 10 Jahren aussieht. Und Aristoteles hat gesagt, er kann es auch nicht sagen, wie die Welt in 10 Jahren aussieht, aber er weiß, wenn sich viele für eine bessere Welt einsetzen, dann wird es besser. Und wenn sich viele gar nicht einsetzen, zurückhaltend oder für Schlechtes einsetzen, wird es schlechter. Ich denke, der Einsatz für Regeln und dass sich alle an Regeln halten, ist per se eine gute Sache. Und wie man dann mit den Dilemmata umgeht, dass sich Menschen partout nicht an Recht und Gesetz halten, die eigene Bevölkerung ermorden und tyrannisieren wie im Iran, das ist dann eine andere Frage. Da verstehe ich das Engagement, dann bei so viel Missachtung von Recht dann auch selber zu Gewalt zu greifen. Aber der Grundsatz muss sein, dass Menschen Regeln schaffen und sich alle an die Regeln halten.
Last word to you.
はい。今、力や取引によって現状を変えようという動きがどんどん広がっています。私はこの動きは決して一過性のものではなくして、今後もこうした動きは続いていくのではないかと心配をしています。一方で法の支配という考え方、確かに過去においては法の支配が徹底されなかった、不十分だった、こういった指摘がある。これは私も十分承知をしています。しかし法の支配という理想を語り続けることは多くの国に対して貴重なメッセージになると私は信じています。私は日本の総理大臣在任中にこのロシアによるウクライナの侵略が始まりました。その時、私は NATO の首脳会合に日本の総理大臣として初めて出席をし、今日のウクライナは明日の東アジアかもしれないと。よって、こうした力による現状変更、 これは認めるべきではないということを訴えました。この法の支配というものが守られていく、これが法の支配が守られていくことが続かないとしたならば、東アジアをはじめ、このいくつかのこの地域や国において、それでは自分たちも力による現状変更ができるというこの勘違いを引き起こしてしまって、混乱が広がってしまう、そういったリスクはあるのではないかと私は思っています。よって世界の現状は力や取引によって現状変更が行われる、こういったことが拡大をしている、この傾向はなかなか今後も変わりにくいのかもしれませんが、そうであっても法の支配を守っていくんだという建前は国際社会としてみんなで協力をして守っていく、こういった努力はこれからも大事であると私は思っています。
Thank you very much. We've had a very deep discussion from 5 panelists who've been there, who've seen us through other crises, and through their thoughts and actions will continue to do so. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you for your time. And I believe we now take a break.